Among the female serial killers in the United States, Rhonda Bell Martin was one of the notorious one among them. Rhonda Bell Martin was born in 1907. Rhonda got married at an early age. At the age of 15 in 1922, she was married to her first husband, R Alderman. Their marriage lasted for just 4 years. In 1928, Rhonda married her second husband, George Garrett. Her marriage with George Garrett lasted for 9 years and they had 5 children. Her first victim was her own child Mary, who was just 4 years old when she died. Her second husband George Garrett was the second victim. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic by Rhonda. He eventually died in 1937. The course of death for George Garrett was determined to be pneumonia. 3-year-old Imogen was Rhonda's next victim. She was dead the same year as her dad in 1937. Rhonda's mother Frances was the next to go. All 3 were killed by Rhonda in 1937. Sympathizers were sending Rhonda cards and letters just to send their love. Because they thought it was a bad year for Rhonda. She lost her husband, mother and a daughter. In 1939, Rhonda married her third husband Talmadge John Gibson. Luckily for Talmadge, the marriage did not last long. It just lasted 5 months. The next victim in line was Judith. She was just a year old, one of Rhonda's daughters. In 1940, Rhonda killed her other daughter, Anna, who was just 6 years old. 3 years later in 1943, her daughter 11-year-old Ellen was killed. In 1950, Rhonda decided to get married again. She married Claude Martin. Less than a year after their marriage, Claude was already seriously ill. Claude Martin died in 1951. 8 months after Martin's death on April 27, 1951. Mrs. Martin married her stepson, the biological son of Claude Ronald C. Martin, 21 years her junior. He lies in a veterans' hospital paralyzed by arsenic poisoning. Ronald Martin's illness, for which Mrs. Martin is under indictment for attempted murder, touched off. The investigation had brought to light the series of poisonings. In all, she killed her own mother, 2 husbands, and her children in Birmingham, Alabama. She was eventually foiled by the results of an autopsy, confessed to the crimes, and was given the electric chair in 1957. Rhonda Bell Martin was a waitress in Montgomery, Alabama. She poisoned her 5th husband, formerly her son-in-law, but he survived only to be left paraplegic. His illness led authorities to look into the strange deaths surrounding Rhonda, and in March 1956 she confessed to poisoning her mother, 2 husbands, and 3 of her children. She denied killing 2 other children. The prosecution claimed that collecting insurance money was her motive, but she never admitted this was the case. She was convicted of murdering 51-year-old Claude Martin in 1951 by surreptitiously feeding him rat poison, and sentenced to die in Alabama's electric chair. Montgomery, Alabama on March 14, 1954. State's attorneys headed for court with the bizarre tale of a middle-aged waitress who, they said, admitted slaying her mother, 3 small daughters and 2 of her 5 husbands with poison. 49-year-old Mrs. Rhonda Bell Martin also told in a signed statement, according to Circuit Solicitor William F. Thetford, how she fed and poisoned once was her stepson. The auburn-haired waitress waived preliminary hearing in city court on the only formal charge thus far drawn up against her, the killing of Claude Martin, her fourth husband, in 1951. Mrs. Martin was bound over to the Montgomery County Grand Jury without bond and ordered moved from the city to the county jail. She is married to Martin's 29-year-old son, Ronald, who has been under treatment for 9 months for poisoning. It was Ronald's illness that led to the murder investigation. City and state authorities arrested Mrs. Martin in Mobile. After 3 days of questioning, Thetford announced that the bespectacled waitress had signed a statement admitting she poisoned the 2 Martins and 5 other people. Mrs. Martin was vague about her motive for the killings, the solicitor said, but she told of having insurance on all 6 victims who died. The amount was not disclosed, but Thetford said she recalled receiving between of Claude Martin. A jury of 12 men deliberated 3 hours and 10 minutes, before convicting her of poisoning Martin after about a year of married life. When the verdict was read, Mrs. Martin buried her head in her arms and sobbed. The woman's attorney based his defense on a plea of insanity. The prosecution countered that Mrs. Martin served arsenic in coffee to her husband in order to collect some paltry amount of insurance and to get him out of the way so she could marry his son. Solicitor William F. Thetford introduced evidence that Mrs. Martin collected $2,750 on 3 insurance policies upon her husband's death. Her 5th husband, Ronald Martin, survived the poisoning, but the other victims died. Ronald Martin is the son of the victim for whose killing the waitress paid with her life. Prison officials found in Mrs. Martin's Bible a note she had written October 14, 1956. It was turned over to authorities at Kilby Prison, where the electrocution was carried out. The note said, "At my death, whether it be a natural death or otherwise, I want my body to be given to some scientific institution to be used as they see fit. But especially to see if someone can find out why I committed the crimes I have committed. I can't understand it, for I had no reason whatsoever. There is definitely something wrong. Can't someone find it and save someone else the agony I have been through?" She was convicted of murdering 51-year-old Claude Carroll Martin in 1951 by surreptitiously feeding him rat poison, and was executed in Alabama's electric chair on October 11, 1957. Rhonda Bell wanted her sentence commuted to life. She had made herself a nice dress, black and white, to go to her hearing. Despite her effort, on October 11, 1957 she walked toward the death chamber wearing her new dress and a wedding ring. Governor James E. Folsom denied an appeal for clemency. The condemned woman was strapped in the chair at 12:07 a.m. and received 2,200 volts of electricity 3 minutes later after one false start. When the switch was thrown the first time, it was discovered the electrodes hadn't been plugged into the chair and the task had be repealed. A few minutes after midnight, she was strapped into the chair and asked if she had anything to say. She shook her head silently. The switch was thrown. Rhonda Bell stiffened while the electricity entered her body. Then she was pronounced dead. Her last meal was hamburger, mashed potatoes, cinnamon rolls and coffee. She was buried at the Montgomery Memorial Cemetery. Thank you for watching Death Row.